What is up, guys? Marcellus Williams, aka TheSwolefessor, here to educate you on health and social well-being. On screen, you guys can be seeing training footage from the weekend that I was in Columbus, Ohio for the Arnold, all the way up until this most recent Tuesday. So yesterday, if you were watching this video today, that it's uploaded, which is Wednesday. And as all this is playing on screen, I just want to talk to you guys about the relationship between muscle mass and proper technique on your lifts. Now, I don't want this to be confused with the very basic beginner concept that has already been covered on this channel multiple times in terms of, how proper technique affects muscle mass from the standpoint of, like, for example, if we're doing a pull-up, you want to make sure that you're using proper technique. You want to make sure that you're fully elevated at the bottom, your scapula fully elevated, and that when you get to the top, your scapula is fully depressed to ensure that you're going through a full range of motion, and thus the lats, the upper back, the biceps, all the muscles involved are getting as much work as possible. We already understand this. At this point, if you don't understand that a longer range of motion is going to lead to more hypertrophy with the muscle groups involved in the movement, then I don't really know what to tell you. However, what I want to discuss is how hypertrophy, actually getting your muscles bigger, is going to help you with maintaining technique on your bigger lifts. So very often, people will kind of go about this the wrong way as far as, like, if they're having technical issues, right? The first thing a lot of powerlifters want to do is throw some random variation at the problem. Be like, oh, you have problems with this in the squat? Let's give you a variation that works on that. Instead of kind of just going through the proper order of how you should sequence these things. So the first step, guys, whenever you feel like you're having any type of technical issue, is to simply try internal cueing. Actually take the time to cue whatever it is you're trying to do in the movement, because oftentimes maybe you are strong enough to do it. Maybe you can get into the proper position. You're just not really thinking about it, or you haven't been shown or taught how to do it. For example, if someone's trying to, like, be a little bit tighter or more stacked in the squat, but they're not at all cueing any type of upper back tightness, well, then they might fold over in the squat a little bit more, right? However, if you simply tell them, hey, I want you to squeeze your upper back a little bit tighter, maybe that already cleans that up. So the first thing is to start with internal cueing. The second thing we want to do is to actually address, okay, well, why are we having this technical issue? In the sense of, if you try cueing it, but you're just not able to maintain position, once again, using the upper back, maybe it's because your upper back is too weak, in which case, okay, our next move should be, while still working on this movement and cueing it, let's get the upper back stronger. Let's make sure we're putting an emphasis on, like, our rows, for example, pin lay rows, cable rows, machine rows, doesn't matter. Let's work on actually getting the upper back stronger. Let's work on motions that are going to force us to emphasize things like retraction and depression, the position we're going to be in when we're squatting, right? And that's something that I think is very easily overlooked. People's main idea is like, okay, well, if I just go give them a variation that forces that, that's going to also work on strength in that area, but that's not always necessarily the case. If somebody has like a weak back, right? And let's say, so your idea is, oh, I'm going to give them front squats to help with that because it's going to force them to work on, like, keeping their back tight. That's also going to very much limit the loads they can do with that variation, though. If your upper back is already kind of weak and it's hard for you to maintain position with low bar, how much harder is it going to be for you to maintain a proper front rack position with the front squat? It's going to be very difficult for you, which means that the loads you can use on the variation are going to be very limited, and thus the actual strength carryover into the main movement is not going to be all that beneficial. So I would make the argument that it's actually more beneficial to be a little bit more specific if you can, and then work on actual other movements, like accessory movements that will focus more on the upper back. Now, with that being said, you guys already know my views on, like, variation accessory work. I am not anti-variation by any means. I'm the furthest from it. I'll have a video linked in the description box down below over, like, my thoughts on variation accessory work. But the problem is, I feel like too many lifters get too focused on doing a bunch of random variations almost mindlessly, and without actually, like, using critical thinking to address the problem of, okay, what variations are we using and why? And I also think that too many powerlifters focus on just doing random variations of the big three instead of accessory work, because in a lot of powerlifters' mind, if it's not the big three or somehow related to the big three, then it's worthless, which simply isn't the case, guys. You have to understand that if you look at the top lifters, right, like, they're jacked, they have a lot of muscle mass, and there's a reason for that, man. We're looking at people like Russell Orhe, Ashton Ruska, Charlie Dixon. Like, these guys are jacked, and what people have to remember is that at the end of the day, if you have to choose between just being very technically efficient or being jacked, you want to be jacked. Obviously, we want to do both, right? The whole purpose of proper technique is so that we can get the most bang for our buck when it comes to, like, building muscle. But from the standpoint of the big three movements, is if we're using proper technique, it lets us utilize the full potential of the muscle groups involved, right? But the reality is that if you have the prettiest technique in the world, but you have no real muscle mass on you, it doesn't matter. You're not going to get that much stronger. That proper technique's only get you so far. Whereas how often do we see people who maybe don't have great technique or awesome technique, but because they're just big and actually strong, they can still complete the lift. So obviously you want the best of both worlds, right? You want to maximize your leverages, maximize your technique, but also be as strong as possible. And how do we get stronger? By getting bigger, especially when you become more intermediate advanced. Like that's the biggest issue, that so many powerlifters just want to be, you know, hyper specific with the big three. And if they do want to change up the movements, it's always just variation work instead of actually like incorporating proper accessory work to get bigger. Because that's the thing. Oftentimes, it's not that you don't know how to get in proper position or that you can't utilize proper technique. It's that when you get to certain loads, your muscles are too weak for you to maintain proper position or maintain proper technique. And you're only going to be as strong as your weakest link. So if your upper back is weak, that's going to show up in the squat when you get to certain loads. If your legs are weak, that's going to show up in the squat when you get to certain loads. With the bench press, if your triceps are weak, that's going to show up when you get to certain loads. If it's your chest, whatever it may be. With the deadlift, if your glutes and hamstrings are weak, that's going to show up when you get to certain loads. So when I'm talking about the relationship between muscle mass and technique, I'm not just talking about how, hey, using proper technique on your accessory lifts will let you get more like a better hypertrophic response. I'm talking about the fact that getting more muscle mass on your body is going to make it easier to maintain proper technique when you already know how to internally cue these things. So that's kind of what I want to express in this video. It's this fact that a lot of lifters nowadays, they get in powerlifting, they get very hyper specific. They want to get really technically efficient, max arch, wide squats, you know, max stance sumo, all this kind of things. And I'm not knocking any of those things. At the end of the day, I'm kind of like, hey, you lift however you want to lift that you think is going to give you the most competitive edge, so long as you know the rules of powerlifting. I have no issue with that. But understand that regardless of your technique, regardless of your genetics, regardless of your leverages, regardless if you're trying to cut your range of motion with your big three lifts, that taking the time to build muscle up through longer range of motion movements outside of the big three is going to benefit you no matter what. To the end of the day, whether you have a very long range of motion on bench press or a very short range of motion on bench press, if you get the muscles involved in the bench press, the chest, the triceps, the delts, your back, then that is going to give you an advantage over those who don't. Period. That's all it comes down to. Like I tell you guys all the time, you can't control your leverages. You can't control every aspect of your genetics, but the one thing you can control is your ability to put on muscle. Granted, that's limited by genetics too. Some people can put on muscle faster than others. Some people can put on more muscle than others, but at the end of the day, you can still take whatever base you have and build upon that. And as I always tell you guys, if you're not doing everything you can to maximize your muscle growth, then you cannot tell me that you care about being as strong as possible. You cannot tell me that you want to be the best powerlifter you can be if you're out here only doing the big three or variations of the big three, but not taking the time to do your accessory work. You want to take all the time in the world to get your technique as pretty as possible, but you won't take the time to get on some structured accessory work and actually put on mass. And that, guys, is shooting yourself in the foot long term. So just want to emphasize that. This message has been explained on this channel before, but I think putting it in this way will help those of you who get so caught up in technique to know that getting more muscle mass will help you with your technique. But yeah, that's it for the video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, go and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you did. If you're not, leave a comment down below. Let me know what can you do to get better. Like the video, share, subscribe. Keep it simple, specific, scientific, and I'll catch you guys later.